This recording was produced by the Savanna Institute and funded by a grant from the USDA SARE program. You'll be hearing a conversation between aspiring silvopasturists Liz and Nate Brownlee of Nightfall Farm in southern Indiana, and silvopasture expert Darren Bender-Beauregard of Brambleberry Farm in southern Indiana. You can find more silvopasture resources at savannainstitute.org.
All right, so I am here at Brambleberry Farm. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your farm, Darren?
Yeah, we started our farm. This is on my wife's parents' land. There's about 17 acres in the whole place. We're on a very heavy clay ridge top in southern Indiana. Zanesville B series with a fragipan, so we have drainage issues and wet soil, and can get compacted pretty easily. But we started in the fall of 2003. Her parents bought the land back in the 70s and just kept things bush hogged, and we wanted to start a farm after working on some farms. And we started with pretty much no money. We had to borrow money to buy an old 1970 single-wide trailer to live in, and we both had some skills, and so we fixed the roof on that, redid all the plumbing, added a greenhouse to the south side, and kind of made things more livable, put a wood stove in. But we started off by doing more sort of typical human scale permaculture, sheet mulch, no-till market garden. We knew that we had to make some kind of income initially, and we both worked on produce operations, and so that was kind of our, start out, make money from the farm that way. We also worked off-farm jobs, probably about 2 to 3 days a week, as we needed some cash flow, and but we knew we wanted to move away from annual produce at some point. We didn't quite have a solid plan for that, but we had some ideas. So our very first year, we both allowed ourselves, even though we didn't have much money, we both said, we're moving on the land, we're, living our dream that we've been thinking about. Let's both allow ourselves to do the thing that we've been waiting since we were settling in a place to be able to do. And for Spree, that was getting dairy goats, and for me, that was planting fruit trees and berries. And so we, borrowed a small chunk of money to do that, and unfortunately, the dairy goats lasted about 3 months, and Spree got kind of sick of that. And but the trees we put in our very first season before we even made any gardens, and I taught myself how to graft that first year after seeing how much money I'd spent on fruit trees. Bought rootstock and made my own fruit trees for a lot cheaper. We learned how to do root cuttings for berries and do tip roots and divisions, and got stuff from neighbors and from our own plants. Basically expanded our plantings from thereafter by our own resources to save some money. So what happened then was, we sold produce at farmers market, had a very small CSA. We were working on about 3/4 of an acre, but we were sheet mulching it all, doing all no-till, and so it was quite a lot of work. Building good soil all the meantime, but I didn't know it at the time, or wouldn't have admitted it at the time, but also seeing some of the downfalls of sheet mulch and no-till that permaculture doesn't want you to know about. But we started deciding to try selling some of the berries and fruit trees that we had propagated. We got all we needed for our own farm, and we thought, hey, we're already going to farmers market with produce. Let's start some extra berries this year, take them to farmers market with us, see if they'll sell. And sure enough, they sold really well. I found I really enjoyed telling people about the plants. They'd ask a lot of questions. And I felt, I could answer those. I'd grown these things for years, and we started them from our own plants, so we knew about the varieties and how they performed and the rootstocks, and slowly discovered that, we had happened upon kind of a niche that people were really wanting, which was a place to buy food-producing plants that they could trust and that were regionally adapted, that were going to probably grow in our area, and more than that, probably from someone who knew and had experience with them and could tell them and answer about all their questions they have about planting them, caring for them, whether they'll need to spray them or not. And from there, we realized that we started advertising on Craigslist. That's the only advertising we've ever done. And we've had more and more people coming out from Bloomington, Indiana, which is an hour north of us, and Louisville, Kentucky, which is an hour southeast of us. And more and more we found that we could actually cut out the farmers market altogether. We stopped growing produce altogether. Stopped growing produce for the market, stopped going to the farmers market. We still sold some produce for a couple of years to a local food co-op. And then cut the produce altogether and just had our own homestead garden for our house. And then the nursery was pretty much our main farm operation at that point. I forgot to mention on the way, we always have had some livestock. We started out as sort of light vegetarians, not real hardcore, but when we started raising our own chickens, we'd figure out what to do with the males, and we decided it was okay to eat them. And from there, it just kind of grew. Then we got American guinea hogs back when they were an obscure rarity. Happened on them through a friend of a friend, and got into breeding stock, registered breeding stock for those, and Esprit was managing that. And we were doing pastured pigs, selling breeding stock and selling pastured pork to people. And then I got sheep because I wanted to have a ruminant on the farm to make use of all the grass that the pigs, didn't eat everything of. And then we got geese, and we were doing a rotation of geese and pigs and sheep on our pasture, and rotated them through. We had, at that point, by then, had planted our Silvopasture and our 3.5 acre open pasture, which is our main field, and working pretty well. So trying to think, I should probably wind that up and
that's
get
great.
More details.
That's perfect, actually.
So, yeah.
Okay, so tell me about the Silvopasture setup that you have, that you rotate animals through.
Yeah. So our main Silvopasture, the 3.5 acre, which is right on the ridge top. The crests were on one of the higher ridges in our area. It had been, when we moved here, it was mostly broom sedge and other grasses indicating just stripped fertility, that the soil had been stripped. We'd heard through the grapevine that it had been, over-farmed with corn and tobacco and everything. Knowing now what I do from seeing the area, I'm pretty sure what the main problem was, that it was probably over-hayed. Knowing that hay crops can take out 2 times what a corn crop can from ground, and people just don't realize that because it grows back every year, and the change is more slow and gradual. And so I think that's really what happened, and it pulled almost all the phosphorus, a lot of micronutrients out, vastly lowered the pH, and we were dumb enough to believe these permaculture books we were reading that just adding mulch or organic matter makes everything better, and it's going to there's everything there in the soil that you need. You just need to, make the soil life, make it pop, and do the right things and all this stuff. So, we kind of tried that for a few years, and just didn't seem like we tried planting clovers, tried all this, and just, we just waste money, waste time. Nothing would come up hardly, and the grazing with the animals, the pigs we were bringing corn in for, so we were adding a little bit of fertility with those, and a little bit of the poultry. We'd see little islands of fertility that would sort of start, and we knew something was happening, but that was all from brought in fertility. But I should probably cut that rabbit trail. But the we set up the Silvopasture. I had always read about swales in their permaculture books, but never quite felt 100% about them in our heavy clay soils. In the winter, what I saw was we often had too much water, especially with our fragipan, with standing water underneath. I didn't want to sink more water in or make it even wetter. Even though in the summer we always have a drought period, it'd be nice to have swales then, but the rest of the year, heck no. Wouldn't want them at all. And then the idea of having to work around these curvy things that would make it hard to fence. I had built enough fence and set up enough temporary fence that I knew that the more corners you have, the more posts you need, the more, yeah. Anyway, so I had read a couple articles from Mark Shepard in the Permaculture Activist magazine. I kind of heard about him. I liked kind of what I heard, but couldn't get my hands on much information. It was kind of before the internet was like super dense with everything easily accessible. But I found a slideshow from Mark Shepard's farm scale permaculture course there and looked through it and was just like, from what I sort of assumed was happening from pictures, I just loved what I saw. I didn't know he had done things on swale setup or any of that, but I just saw the alley cropping with, rows of trees and then veggies in between, or pasture. And I just love that idea of, we had planted initially behind our trailer a food forest, your typical permaculture, tangly, packed, inaccessible food forest. We had our paths planned out, and, we mulched the paths, and meanwhile the mulch made just more weeds grow, and mulch more every year, and weeds grow better every year. And we planted gooseberries under peach trees, and then you pretty much realize, oh, what was the end plan? We're not going to mulch this whole area every single year. That's like stupid. I wish we had just done just fruit trees, and I could at least use a scythe or something, or graze underneath of them. And I like the idea of just having a single row of trees you could mow on either side of. You can do what you want in the alleys. It's a versatile space. You don't have to just be food forest and that's it. You can't get the tractor in there because you'll hit your head on everything or get stuck. And so I like the open feel of the pictures of Mark's place, the versatility of it. And so that's what I did. What I assumed it was just straight rows. And so reading more conventional, orcharding stuff, I knew that orienting your rows north-south made for more even ripening of the fruit. You get better color on the fruit. You get more, photosynthesis from either side, which now I know, east-west is a little more, supposedly more efficient photosynthesis for the plants. So I'm kicking myself for that for the past 7 years. But it's all fine. No one's going to, it doesn't have to be perfect. But so our setup is a 3.5 acre pasture. We have an access lane 12 foot wide down the center that we can get in with tractors or trucks or whatever. An access lane on the north and south end that's also 12 feet so we can get out and go around the bend. And then we just have very straight north-south rows that are every 60 feet. Single row of trees. When I started, I also didn't know about what Mark was doing, and we just planted our trees on the perfect spacing, 15-foot spacing for semi-dwarf apples and peaches and pears, and that's how I planted things before. And now we're starting to fill those in, but yeah, we did that spacing. I had drawn out, a 25 to 30 foot tree. On that spacing, east-west, and I still think this is an advantage to doing east and west setup, is that, north-south setup, that, with those trees, the sun coming in morning and afternoon would still, angle in under the tree canopy and make decent pasture grow right up to the trunk, if I wanted that. And that's one advantage still of a north-south orientation versus east-west. East-west, you get that shady zone that's almost always shady. You don't have good grass growing. If you have animals, it's going to be muddy. So I do see that still as an advantage, and it's working out pretty well. And let's see. So,
Let me ask, so did you plant into an existing hayfield, essentially?
Yeah, it's essentially an existing hayfield that had probably basically been abandoned, sold because it was almost worthless at that point. Some people that had no idea what they were doing bought it, thinking they could farm it, and things didn't work out real well, and they just bush hogged it. So thankfully, bush hogging kind of, did something at least. It was at least knocking stuff down so it could build a little teensy bit of organic matter. But
and then did you, while the trees were getting established, what did you do while they were?
Yeah, so while the trees were getting established, we just grazed in the alleys. It was just pasture. We around the trees, Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Because we were at that point, we had set up around each tree we put 5 comfrey plants. We had found comfrey to be a really good tool to put around a fruit tree. You know, we mulched it the first year. All the trees got 5 shovelfuls of wood chips or something, and maybe cardboard underneath of that to kill out the sod. And then we popped 5 comfrey roots around each one, and most of them came up. But and we also we found we always had extra little tiny garlic cloves that were useless in the kitchen. We'd save them up and we'd go out and put those around the trunk of each of these tiny fruit trees. And that has really worked to keep rodents. We've lost almost none of those like 96 original trees to rodent damage. The 1 or 2 we did were ones we never got garlic around. So we have not had bowl problems with putting garlic cloves around the base. The interesting thing with the comfrey that has been a good learning is that this field is so stripped of fertility that you can see in the really extra poor areas, the comfrey, it came up, but it could hardly do anything, and it has just petered out. Yeah. It's a place the only place I've ever seen where comfrey would not grow. And as we've come in now and added some, I added some soft rock phosphate and gypsum and some zinc sulfate, just some of these things after we finally got our heads open to the idea that this stuff is just not there anymore. It's been taken away. And so we invested into some of that stuff, and now the comfrey in those areas is actually starting to grow again, and trees are responding. Clovers that we did not even replant had been lying dormant, and that phosphorus and the gypsum, the calcium from the gypsum, and sulfur just woke those things up. And we had, the first year I have pictures, you can see, like that first year after applying those things, we see a 10-foot swath either side of the trees where I applied that stuff. It's like this band of ladino clover that we had planted years before but never saw anything from. So it was pretty amazing to see that. But yeah, so back to your question was the way we protected the trees, which were very small at that point. We had sheep and geese and pigs. And we came up with this idea, which I've read other people since have kind of come up with a similar idea, which is interesting, which was to buy those little cheap rebar step-in posts at Tractor Supply, and then the little cheap insulators, clips that hold the poly wire and slide up and down on the posts. We did strips of those that made the tree rows 5 foot wide. It was essentially like a 5 foot wide bed, and it went along 2.5 feet out from the center of the row. So that protected the trees. We just did 3 wires, one at the top, one in the middle, one at the bottom, and we would adjust those up and down. And we'd have to use a weed eater or scythe to trim under them to keep weeds from sorting them out, which was a pain in the butt. But it was a very cheap way of setting up we called them semi-permanent fences. We knew that eventually when the trees were big enough that we would take them down.
And those were electrified? They
were electrified, so we had a plug-in mains charger. We tried for a while the solar fencers, and everybody's tried them and realized their shortcomings, the ones you bought at the farm stores. But it worked really well, and we actually found that to our surprise, it kept the geese in. The geese we kept in. It was the 3 strands. They either got shocked or they just didn't want to go through this. They're kind of clumsy, kind of trip easily, and I wonder if they just tried to go in and ran into this thing and just decided it wasn't worth it. But they stayed in with that and a 2-foot net fence. The sheep we cut, it worked out pretty well. We cut 60-foot sections. We bought electronet. We cut them into 60-foot sections, even though they tell you you're not supposed to do it. It works just fine. You just got to tie the wires together on one side, and it's fine. But we cut them into 60-foot sections of fence, and then we would put a cap on both ends. Or we could make any size paddock that way by doing these little subdividers within. And all I needed was 3 fence sections for every animal unit, because I would just leapfrog the fence. Sure. And so again, we were pretty, still money challenged at that point. Not that we aren't money challenged now, but we're doing a little better, not pinching every penny, but it was a way to make use of our little money we had and make those resources go farther. So that worked, but in the end, it was a pain to have to trim under the fences. And but it did keep sheep in. It kept sheep in. We kept the ram as well, and he was separate, and he stayed in, and it worked. And it worked for the pigs. We'd always have to slide down. We had piglets, slide the bottom ones down and trim before we moved them. And the system worked really well. I mean, as far as a cheap way to protect trees, and we had no deer issues, even though we've seen a lot of deer pressure in our place at various times. I am convinced that running, livestock in a system, that the deer just smell that livestock, and maybe it was the pigs. I don't know what it was, but
That's
it just, I think they smell that domestic livestock, and they're wary of that. And so, because they we have friends that put up 10 wires of like poly wire and electrify with a huge charge, and they still have deer getting in and eating their trees, but we never saw a single tree get nailed by that. We didn't put anything around the base of the trees. They were just in those like 3 wire semi-permanent fence system. So it worked great. It's cheap. I don't know. Now I know more, and we now we have cows in the system. That's it. We have some geese, and we move chickens, get ducks at various times, and kind of add stuff. But the cows, we just use reels and poly braid from Kang Cove, and 3-to-1 geared reels, and it's just so easy. So the trees aren't permanently fenced at all anymore, and we've seen a little more deer damage. But now that we have cows back in the system. We had a break for about 3 years. We didn't have any ruminants at all, and just didn't have time. And I was doing a big grass-fed beef project down the road on 230 acres, and this system was somewhat dormant with animals. And that's when we started seeing deer pressure again. We saw deer come in and like break huge branches off now 15-foot trees, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
So it was something. I don't know. But anyway.
We see a similar thing. We have very little deer pressure on our tree plantings, and there are deer around. I mean, we see them on our road.
I know you guys have deer. I know where you live. Like, I've been there. Yeah.
And yet we don't see that
problem.
Cool. We don't have them, knock on wood, in our garden even.
Yeah, no, us either.
And
it's like
all we have is a rabbit fence around the garden.
Yeah.
And
I think there's something about those domestic livestock. The deer just like know that means like humans, or that means like what else? I think
what else? Yeah, that's interesting.
So that's cool. But it's basically, I think, and now like our main focus is, I'm wanting to fill in. What we planted was apples, peaches, pears, sweet cherries, sour cherries, and I threw a few mulberries in here and there, and that was it. And then it was just like comfrey, and then all the space between the trees. And our idea at the time was that we thought, we might be able to sell organic, not organic but naturally grown fruit, tree fruits, which that'd be a great way to make money, But now we know that it's it's really hard to get like store quality, apples and that kind of stuff, and so, without spraying Emidan or whatever on them, and so we don't want to do that, and so we may not be able to have sellable fruit. Plus, it's perishable. Plus, it's not something you can like eat. And not something Mark Shepard is like this idea of growing food. Apples and pears and all these things are great. They give us some vitamins and minerals and stuff, but they're not something you can actually like live on. And so, but the thing is, when we planted that, I was seeing that kind of stuff on our original trees we planted behind the trailer in the food forest. And so I wasn't totally naive to it. And what I told myself was that we're going to plant these things in the best possible scenario. They'll make amazing fruit. The animals will be grazing and eating all the fruit drops. They'll break the pest cycle. We'll have amazing fruit because of that, because that's what permaculture tells us. And, which I know now I'm already seeing that that's total bunk too. And it probably helps, but it's like they come in from other places. And but that's the best scenario. We'd have like beautiful, sellable, naturally grown fruit. The second best scenario would be like, it doesn't do as well. It's more like what I think it's going to be. You're going to have like some wormy apples and like not perfect stuff. But we could press them for cider, We can make cider, sell cider, or like make cider vinegar, make hard cider for ourselves just to drink and something. And then let the animals eat the rest, The worst case scenario is everything's total crap. But like at least pigs would eat them, Like and animals would eat them, And that's at least a shade element in the system. That's its first priority, is give them some shade, anchor some soil, buffer some of the blasted sun that's coming down, and there's something that's edible for the animals off of them. So Now thinking of that, it's sort of like, if I have stuff in there, I don't want to sell fruit anymore. Like, it's like, maybe if we start getting really great fruit, I would, because it'd be a good selling point, but, for our labor. But at this point, I want to put more nut trees, persimmons, pawpaws, things that, a little more niche in there, a little more what I want to eat, and a little more what I was already growing on our property. We have tons of hickory trees. We got oaks. We got the whole field out there is just persimmons. I mean, it's just I always mow off 5-foot persimmons that'll grow 5 foot after I mow them, because that was what was here. And we got here, and they have these huge root systems. I'm suckered, and now I'm grafting onto those persimmons, improved varieties that I need for our nursery. And I get to now trial all these crazy persimmons that I'm getting from nursery friends who specialize in that. And so I have persimmons that are like these guys have bred that no one else has that besides them. One of those trees, actually, a friend, Don Compton, was his very best persimmon out of like 1,500 trees that he planted, that he bred, did crosses of. And this is his best tree called Goliath. And I happened like last year or 2 years ago to put a bunch of those scions onto my persimmons. And meanwhile, his tree completely died from a weird canker or damage at the base.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I had like 3 trees that it's on. So that, like, his favorite trees now saved because I happened to put it on my persimmons out there. So that's kind of a cool story. But anyway, so yeah, now we're kind of layering in stuff. I'm also making it more thick, more dense, not at the proper spacing. Somewhat following Mark Shepard's reasoning, but also like I just see as I go around, I see these clumps of trees that are in the middle of fields, and they'll be like pear trees or other things that grown with a sassafras and a hickory and a oak, and it's like they're all kind of make it, even they're all like 3 feet apart and huge, and they're still producing fruit. I'm like, it doesn't make any rational sense from a horticultural standpoint, like, or a cultivation standpoint, but like, I'm going to try it. And at the very least, if I see competition being a problem, I'll cut out the ones that I don't want at that point. But I'd rather have everything going from the beginning now and select what I want once I know what I want. I guess I know now is that, every 5 years I change what I want. So like by planting fruit trees, I thought I wanted fruit trees. Now 7 years, 8 years later, it's like, I don't want that many apples. I don't want that many peaches. I don't want to sell them. I don't want to have to sell them or do something with them. I want more nut trees, more persimmons, more whatever. So
I like the idea that your system is adaptable, though.
Yes.
Right? So you don't have to cut down the apple trees necessarily.
Yeah, they can die on their own.
That's right. You can plant the nut trees in. And
I know persimmons will outcompete them. I know the nut trees will outcompete them.
Yeah.
So I can let them do that. Or if I really like the nut trees and want to like release their canopy, I can just cut down the apples and boom, I'll see a big response. But I may be able to let them all grow as a big thicket, and I can still mow on either side with the tractor. So that's what, instead of fence, and that's what counts. And that's from the beginning. What I saw at pictures of Mark's place, which just totally addicted me to like those pictures, was this is a versatile system. Everything else I've read about with permaculture is these tangly, tight, overdeveloped systems that you can hardly walk through, let alone take a mower or even a tractor or set up fence for animals in. And it's like, this is a system where, I could grow crops, I could grow corn and dried beans or something, which I'm actually doing, experimenting with this year. In those alleys between the trees, it can be pasture, it can be cover crop. I'm also doing that. There's nice sorghum Sudan grass patch this year, and it's a versatile system. It's easy to get around. I can drive a truck, I can turn my pickup truck around in one of those 60-foot alleys, and it's nice. It's worked out really well to have that versatile system. My only thing is, I went to one of Mark Shepard's acres 2-day workshops when we were in the beef thing, because I was wanting to do more that kind of stuff on a broad scale. And, I never heard about, I heard about key lime, but never knew what it was. And, hearing the idea of swales that aren't dead level, that let water move through a system in a way that you want it to move, not just force water into the ground everywhere. That kind of really got my interest, and I've been kind of researching that, playing with that in various places. And I kind of wish I had set the system up in a way that I could have had those swales along the tree rows that would fill ponds, dump water out on the ridges so that it, keeps water and nutrients and, but even that, I'm still not convinced that's a good thing in our heavy clay soils. I don't know, but Who knows? So.
Yeah, Indiana and Wisconsin are different places.
Yeah. The Mark's got clay too, and I don't know. I mean, there's pictures of his trees with swales being so much bigger, but I'm like, what I wonder is, you graze animals, especially cows, especially like, intensely rotationally graze animals through these systems that are forcing water into the ground. I mean, is that compacting the crap out of them in the spring longer than if you had not had the swales? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
My best thing is there's a guy, Don Tipping, out in Washington that I don't like follow him, but like I'd love to go. He's one of the few farms I'd love to go visit if I had time and money. But he has a neat system where it's like he has a seasonal swale system where it's like they have a super droughty time of the year and a super wet time of the year, and he has this like stream that they can kind of like dam up and shunt into this whole swale system. Has ponds and all this stuff, but then they just like step in a little clay plug into the. It had 2 spillways in their ponds, and if they put a plug in one way, it makes it all go back out where it's like getting away from the land. Land can drain when it wants, or you can go up and throw some shovelfuls of clay in and step it in, and you can make the next rain or the next whatever come in and just like flood irrigate everything. And
That's
so
neat.
I love that idea. Like that is to me like if you had an ideal, you have swales when you want them. And they're not going to be a problem when you don't want them.
Yeah.
But, oh well. Anyway.
Someday, right?
Shout out to Don Tipping, yeah.
Oh, I'm trying to think of what we haven't covered here. This is no,
right, the
because-
rabbit trails.
No, actually, you've covered a lot
Cool.
of this. Darren.
Awesome.
This is good.
Awesome.
Okay, so now you are still excluding livestock, but
From
just
trees, yes.
From trees, okay.
Yes. Though we experimented a little bit last year with the cows, and we let them in a couple tree areas that had some pretty big trees. I mean, they just rubbed and they just snapped off some stuff that I thought was big enough.
Yeah.
But I mean, they just can do serious damage. So it's just not worth it for me anymore. Now sheep I think be fine, but you still would need trunk protection, and I don't know. We did have a good luck with again sort of a cheap thing. It was a little bit pain to work with, but we bought that orange snow fencing, and we cut strips of that and wrapped it around and zip tied it around tree trunks because it's about 4 feet high. And A.M. Leonard has these great little hard plastic grids that are 6-inch diameter that you pop around the trees. And if I had any unlimited resources, I'd buy those for every tree, and they're great. But they're like $4 or $5 a piece, and 100 trees, that's kind of quickly a lot of money. And so we did this, and that worked pretty well. I mean, that actually kept sheep from peeling the tree trunks. And I think if you had a ton of goats, I don't think it would, but.
No.
Sheep it might. The cows just rubbed on them, and then it kind of like snapped, shredded those things. But, for a cheap way of protecting them, that's one thing. We do have a couple. I grafted onto a few persimmons that were coming from the middle of those alleys, so about 30 foot in. I'd put like 1 or 2 persimmons within those just to get a little more shade more quickly. I know I might be shooting myself in the foot when in the future if I want to like till up any of those areas or whatever, because it might damage the persimmon roots, but whatever, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I tried to build some because they're always going to be in with the animals. I don't want to have to try and put a little tiny fence around those each time because that's a pain. But I tried getting some old pallets for free around here, and screwing them together in a triangle shape to protect those trees. And it kind of worked, but the cows, again, they just started rubbing on them. They've been breaking them one at a time, and there's only 1 or 2 of those left.
And then you got nails in your pasture.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't know. So thankfully it's wood, so I can just kind of crunch those up and they'll be mulch for the trees. But but my plan for those trees now, if I want to do those in the middle of the paddock, we bought a bunch of used cattle panels for cheap this spring from a guy, and I think putting 3 T-posts in and using a bolt cutters to cut the cattle panels into like 4 or 5 foot pieces and doing a triangle or even a circle, bent with 3 T-posts, and then just using heavy wire to do that. I think that would probably protect them enough. And then, and eventually when they're big enough, you can take that off and the cows will be fine. We have a cluster of persimmons that were here when we moved here. They're probably 30 years old. 20, 30 years old, and they're all female trees in a big clump in the middle of one of the paddocks. And we've always had our animals in with those. They're good, they're all about 12-inch diameter trunks, and cows rub on them. They love it, but they're all fine. We've not seen any damage to those, so I know that when they're big enough, even cows can be in with them, and it'll be fine. So, in fact, the cows love to have trees to scratch on. That's their favorite thing. So, it's a good thing. It's a shade and a scratching post. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's end with this. I think
Cool.
we have about a minute left before we're done.
Quick.
Advice to beginners who are thinking of adding silvopasture to their planting.
I would say in a minute, start small. Start with one strip and see how it goes. Experiment with fencing. If you have livestock, see how it goes with that. See if deer are damaging it. Start small. Don't jump in and plant 1,000 trees and then realize that you don't have a good system in place to do it, or your deer pressure is so crazy you're going to have to invest. Because that's going to make everything grind to a halt with your other farming, and this will not bring income in for a while. So just think about that. If you have unlimited resources, sure, go for it. But, just start small, do a trial, see how it goes, I think.
And is it worth it long term, do you think, silvopasture?
I think it's totally worth it long term. I love what I'm seeing in my place. I do hardly any work anymore. The trees are big enough that I could be completely abandon them and they'd be fine because they're above the height where they're now shading some of the grasses and weeds out. And it's just from here on out, it's just sort of synergy. And I don't know. And the animals are getting some shade from it. So it's a definite go for me. I think the nuances are more where I'm working at right now. I think it's a 100% good thing almost anywhere you're at. So, yeah.
Awesome. Darren, thank you so much.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you.